Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my November wrap-up. So the past 2 or 3 months prior to November, I had read a jillion books every month, but I had read a lot of novellas and a lot of mangas. So November was definitely a slower month. I traveled for some of the month and I was really busy at work, so I wasn't able to listen to as many audiobooks as I normally do. So overall, it was just a slower month. I read 10 books and there were some really, really good quality books in there, so I'm excited to talk about them, so let's get into it. First up, I read volumes 5 and 6 of The Way of the House Husband. I only have 6 still from the library. I just read this a couple days ago. These are books I've talked about in a previous wrap-up because I think I started it in October. These are just hilarious. For the most part, there's not a continual plot. It is just each chapter is just a scenario that this man is in as a house husband. He is a previous Yakuza member and now he's a house husband. So he is doing all of his house husband duties, but with a gang member flair, and it's just hilarious. It is a fun, easy, funny read. I am constantly actually laughing out loud while I read them. They're just light filler books in between heavier books that I've been reading, so I've been really enjoying reading these. Next up, I read The Art of Prophecy by Wesley Chu. This is a new release fantasy novel that I really enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars when I read it. I listened to the audiobook, but now, looking back, I don't remember much about what it's about. The overall premise, from what I remember, is that there is the chosen one, and he has this prophecy he has been trained from birth to fulfill. And this woman who is a martial artist, a master martial artist, comes in and sees that his training is lackluster. So she takes it over for him and she starts training him, and he is really not liking her training because he doesn't get pampered the way he was before. However, his prophecy becomes fulfilled by somebody else. Now this entire religion that is based on him and this prophecy is kind of null and void. So he kind of goes on the run because the government is just going to get rid of him. I really enjoyed the characters in the book and I liked the plot. I thought it was a cool twist on the chosen one trope. Just not a whole lot of it has stuck with me since reading it, but I still recommend it. I'm going to be continuing on with the series. I really enjoyed what I remember of it, and I think it is a fun read, and the audiobook was also really great. Next up, I read Ruin by John Gwynne. This is a chunky boy. I enjoyed this book. I've talked about this series in a few other videos as I've been reading it. I've been reading one a month and been loosely buddy reading it with Kyle and Alex over on Read by Kyle and Tall Guy Reads. This series, I don't know if it's because we're all reading it together and so our opinions are influencing each other's, or if we're reading different books. I don't know, because I've heard amazing things about this series. Everyone I hear talking about the series absolutely loves it and they rave about it. And while I'm enjoying it and I think they are good, they are not new favorites for me, and I'm a little bummed about it because they are for what it seems like everyone else. So this edition was probably my favorite so far. This is the 3rd out of 4, and I enjoyed it because the pacing problems I had with the first 2 were a little better. However, there was still a lot of repetition. There's so much traveling in these books that just feels repetitive. The battles feel repetitive. John Gwynne basically kills off every parent figure in the books constantly. Everyone that dies is a parent. It ends up feeling kind of cheap. It's lacking the emotional impact because everyone that's dying is a parent, and so it's predictable. Oh, you're a parent? Bound to die. While I think the plot is fun and I like the characters a lot, I think some of the pacing just struggles a lot. There's a lot of repetitiveness. This series could have definitely been a trilogy with smaller books. It could have been 3 500-page books and you probably still would have had the exact same story, because there's so much what feels like filler in these books that just doesn't feel necessary to the plot. And I know that a lot of it is supposed to be so that you kind of get time with the characters and you get to know them and grow attachments to them. And sometimes it works and sometimes I'm we don't need this scene here. This is just a waste of time. So overall, this series is pretty good. The last like 150 pages of this book, I flew through. I really enjoyed them. I gave it 4 stars. It's maybe more like a 3.5, but I normally don't do half ratings, so it's about 4 stars. I am going to read Wrath. I'd originally said I was going to read it in December, in my December TBR. I'm not so sure now. I just don't know if I don't want to force myself to read it when I'm not totally loving it right now. So I think I'm going to maybe give myself some time to miss the characters and then come back to it later. So we'll see. There's also just so many books I want to read, and I don't want to put myself in a reading slump by reading a book I'm not really wanting. I'm not in the mood for right now. So we'll see. I might still get to Wrath in December. I'm not totally sure, but overall, this is a fun series. I'm just disappointed I'm not loving it as much as everyone else. Next up, I read The Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the Tawny Man trilogy. I loved this edition. I read this and Fool's Fate this month. I will get to Fool's Fate in just a moment. So they both are kind of like gelling in my mind. It's kind of hard to remember where one ended and where the other began. But Golden Fool was phenomenal. I'm just loving this whole series. I think Golden Fool had a few scenes that were really impactful for me. A lot of what happens in the second book, without spoilers or anything, there is a point of contention between 2 of the main characters that I feel like Robin Hobb dealt with superbly. Sometimes Fitz needs to be put in his place because he can be quite annoying, and I feel like in this book he really did, and she did it in such a good way that made Fitz like reflect on himself and kind of improve himself, as opposed to like fighting back against it. And I think it was done really well. And the overall plot of this book was phenomenal, as always. And her characters are they're just top notch. And I am so excited to continue on with The Realm of the Elderlings. Next up, I read The Traitor Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. I read this by recommendation from Alex over on Tall Guy Reads. He has a dedicated review that I will link above. His review is great, and it's what made me pick up this book. I think I did myself a disservice by listening to the audiobook because the premise of this book is really fun and really cool, and I think I would have liked it more if I had read it physically. The names were hard to remember, so for a lot of the book I could not remember, like when somebody would be doing something, I couldn't remember who they were besides Baru, and that kind of like hindered my enjoyment because I couldn't follow the plot as well. Also, the narrator kind of has like a very monotone voice, so I just that led to me not feeling as invested in this story. So overall, I liked it. I gave it 3 stars. I'm going to continue on with the series, but I'm going to read them physically to see if that helps me like connect with the characters a little more. But overall, this is a story about basically colonialism, and there's this empire that is colonizing a bunch of smaller countries and taking over and like taming the savages. It's very reminiscent of American history. So Baru's country is taken over and she is taught in the ways of this empire, and she becomes a very smart accountant and decides to kind of topple this empire from within. And there's some twists at the end that I could not see coming from a mile away. I was blown away by the twists at the end. I had no idea they were coming, and I think that the whole plot was so cool. Again, I just couldn't follow a lot of it because I was having a hard time with the audiobook. So I'm hoping with the second book I am able to understand and digest it better reading it physically. Next up, I read The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. This is a kind of like a thriller urban fantasy kind of book. Fantasy light. There's hardly any fantasy. It's mostly like a thriller. This book I just picked up because I'd seen a lot of people talking about it, and the audiobook was available on Scribd, so I picked it up and I liked it. I gave it 3 stars. I'm not huge on thrillers, just I don't read a lot of them, and I didn't see the plot twists coming at the end, so I guess that means it's successful. I know that's like people's gripes with thrillers, is if they can guess what's going to happen, and I couldn't. So I think it was a really interesting premise. Basically, this woman is trying to get away from her hometown. She is a linguist. She understands a lot of languages, and she gets hired unexpectedly by the Cloisters in New York City. And she works with these 2 people on this project that is looking for like the origin of tarot cards and stuff. And there is like kind of some occult magic that happens, and there is some unexplained occurrences. It's kind of hard to, I'm trying not to spoil things, but some things happen that you're trying to figure out what's going on. And it was fast paced. It was fun. I really liked the characters. The setting was really cool. It made me want to go visit the cloisters because I live right outside New York City. So made me want to go visit the cloisters because I've never been. So overall, I thought it was a really fun book, and the audiobook was really fun. Next up, I read Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb, which I mentioned earlier. This is the last book in the Tawny Man trilogy. Now this book was amazing. I bawled my eyes out at the end. Originally, when Robin Hobb started The Realm of the Elderlings, the Tawny Man trilogy was supposed to be the end of the series. So you definitely feel that at the end. The last chapter, the epilogue, definitely wraps up most things. It was so emotional, so impactful. She has such a way of making you feel so connected to these characters. She's just a master. I typically am a crier when it comes to end of series, so I could definitely tell that this was originally intended to be the end of this entire Realm of the Elderlings, because I was a wreck. I was bawling my eyes out. I didn't think I would cry, but I did. And I absolutely loved it. And I've now started the Rainwild Chronicles, which is the next series in the Realm of the Elderlings. I am about halfway through Dragon Keeper. A lot of people kind of dunk on the Rainwild Chronicles, but so far I'm liking it. I can definitely tell that it's not on par with this book, but it is still capturing my attention. We're learning a lot about the dragons and stuff, and I love dragons, as everyone knows, so I'm enjoying the series overall so far. But this book was phenomenal. This is my book of the month. It was very hard to choose between this and the next book I'm going to talk about, but this was my book of the month for sure. It was so good. I cried my eyes out. If you haven't read Robin Hobb yet, I implore you to give it a try. Next up, the book that was in contention for Book of the Month, I read Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is a new release that has been all over the place, and I'm probably going to do a dedicated review sometime later in December, so look forward to that. So I won't get too far into this right now, but basically this is a story about a young boy in China who is taken to Britain and trained to be a translator. And the translators all work in this Tower of Babel in Oxford. Him and a few other people who are not British are quickly become friends and must kind of battle their way through racism and sexism and all of this other stuff and cope with their part in the empire and imperialism and colonialism. And it is a truly gripping book. I absolutely adored it. I started tabbing about 170 pages in because I was like, there are some ringer quotes in here. I started tabbing because some of these quotes are just so impactful, and I feel like I learned a lot reading this book, and I can see myself reading this every few years just to really understand what R.F. Kuang was showing the reader here. And I also loved the characters. I didn't cry at the end, but I did come close. The ending was brutal and heart-wrenching. She kind of took some typical tropes when it comes to books like this and kind of twisted them just a little bit. She does a really good job of showcasing how not everyone's experience is the same, even when they're in similar circumstances, and people react to things in different ways. And she does a really fantastic job of showing that and showing the struggles that people of color and women have to go through, especially in 18th century UK. So overall, this book was absolutely phenomenal. I loved it, hands down, 5 stars. I've seen some people complain about it, and most of the complaints I don't agree with. So I think this is a great book, and I beg everyone to give it a try at least. I thought I was going to feel stupid reading it, and I did not. So I think it's great. Last up, I read Deadbeat by Jim Butcher. This is the 7th book in the Dresden Files, and I finally enjoyed a Dresden book. I have historically not loved them, and I read the first one and didn't like it. So I was like, I'm just not going to read this series. It's not for me. And then Kyle, over on Read by Kyle, convinced me to skip 2, 3, and 4, read 5, skip 6, and then read 7 and on. So I read 7 this month and actually really enjoyed it. It was the first time that I really felt like Harry was less annoying He's still very annoying, but he was less annoying, and I think the big change for me was that I read it physically, so it gave Harry a little bit less character, I guess. It made him less annoying to me because I was able to dictate in my mind how annoying he is, if that makes sense. So I really enjoyed this one. There's still definitely faults. Harry is still pretty misogynistic and annoying, and this is definitely written with the male gaze, but the plot itself was really fun. The side characters were really fun. I'm excited to continue now for the first time in my Dresden journey. So here we are. Never thought it would happen, but I liked a Dresden book. And that is all of the books I read in November. It was a really great reading month. I had a lot of fun with all the books I read. There weren't any bad books by any means. There were some I didn't enjoy as much, but none of them were bad. And I'm very excited for what December holds because I have some fun plans to wrap up the end of the year before going into a very busy 2023. Thank you guys for watching. If you could please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know down below what you read in November. What was your favorite book in November? I love hearing about it. I love getting new recommendations. If you really like my content, please hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post new videos. As always, your support means the world to me, and until next time, thank you guys.